Welcome back. We're on chapter 5 of Unshakable Hope. And chapter 5 to me is a very powerful one. They all are, but this one is special. This is when God's promise speaks to us. When a believing person prays, great things happen. How many of you have had the power of prayer in your life? You may be a witness to that, and that is awesome because I think that's the greatest gift we have is prayer. I say that over and over again so many times, but it is. And so this week's promise is really close to many hearts because your prayers have power. Your prayers have power. When you speak, God listens. And you're thinking, why on earth would God listen to me? I mean, you already know that answer because we talked about that last week. You are a precious child of God. And your prayers matter because you are God's child. It's actually that simple. You're not just an anybody or somebody. You are a child of God. So your prayers matter and your prayers are heard. And then you wonder, some people ask me, will God answer my prayers? Maybe, maybe not. And maybe your prayers will get answered even more than you can imagine. You know why? Because God knows us intimately. Jeremiah reads we're intimately and made, and God created us, knitted us in the womb. God knows us probably better than we even know ourselves. So our prayers will be answered. Maybe, and maybe even more than you could ever imagine. But all in God's timing. Always remember that. I say that over and over again. It's all in God's timing. But you can stand firm on the promise for this week that when a believing person prays, great things happen. You are never, ever without hope. Why are you never without hope? It's because we're never without prayer. So you're never without hope because you're never without prayer. You can pray anytime, anywhere, any place. Okay? Perhaps today you find yourself in a position where it feels impossible. Or you feel exhausted and worn. And you feel like you just want to quit. Don't quit. Give it to God in prayer. Absolutely. Because what happens when a believing person prays, great things happen. So memorize that verse for this week. Memorize it. Hold it close in your heart. You may even want to post it on your refrigerator. Put it on your laptop, on your desk, somewhere in your office area. Print it out and frame it and put it by your bedside. When a believing person prays, great things happen. You see, prayer is not your last resort. Prayer is your first step. Perhaps you don't or never have experienced that power of prayer, but it's there. Most of you have. And perhaps God has power that you've never, ever seen. And perhaps God has strength that you don't even know. You see, God delights in our prayers and will answer our prayers in God's timing and perhaps even bigger and better than we've imagined and different, perhaps. When a believing person prays, great things happen. That's kind of what Max Lucado talks about in his book on this chapter for this week. Now we're going to dive into a few Bible verses for this week. And the first one I would like to dive into is 1 Kings chapter 18. 1 Kings chapter 18 and verses 30 to 39. I'll read those for us today. And while I'm reading this, I wrote myself some notes. So I want you to place yourself in this scene as I'm reading this. Okay? And what would you have expected had you been there? All right. And what would you have experienced? And then how would you have responded? Okay. So as I'm reading this, think about what you would have expected, what you would have experienced, maybe how you would have responded. Okay. All right. 1 Kings 18:30-39. Then Elijah said to all the people, "Come closer to me." And all the people came closer to him. First he repaired the altar of the Lord that had been thrown down. Elijah took 12 stones, according to the number of the tribes of the sons of Jacob, to whom the word of the Lord came, saying, "Israel shall be your name." With the stones he built an altar in the name of the Lord. Then he made a trench around the altar, large enough to contain 2 measures of seed. Next he put the wood in order, cut the bull in pieces, and laid it on the wood. He said, "Fill 4 jars with water and pour it on the burnt offering on the wood." Then he said, "Do it a second time." And they did it a second time. Again he said, "Do it a third time." And they did it a third time, so that the water ran all around the altar and filled the trench also with water. At the time of the offering of the oblation, the prophet Elijah came near and said, "O Lord, God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, let it be known this day that you are God in Israel, that I am your servant, and that I have done all these things at your bidding. Answer me, O Lord, answer me, so that this people may know that you, O Lord, are God, and that you have turned their hearts back." Then the fire of the Lord fell and consumed the burnt offering, the wood, the stones, and the dust, and even licked up the water that was in the trench. When all the people saw it, they fell on their faces and said, "The Lord indeed is God, the Lord indeed is God." Here ends our reading from 1 Kings. Did you put yourself there? What would you have expected? Would you have expected that the God of Israel to come and do all these things? I mean, Elijah put a bidding out. What would you have experienced? Would you have experienced the power of a bidding prayer? Would you have experienced the power of God? Or would you have just said, "Oh, well, doesn't matter"? How would you have responded? I guess if I put myself in that position, I guess I would have expected some kind of response. And I guess God did a doozy, as God always does. It's pretty awesome, isn't it? Elijah offered a prayer unto God, petitioning God to answer so that the people might know that the Lord was the God of Israel. Then the people fell down. And what did the people say? The Lord indeed is God. The Lord indeed is God. So Elijah offered to them the bidding prayer and the power of prayer. Just like Elijah, your prayers have power also, individually and collectively. Our last verse that I want to look at for today is from the Gospel of St. Matthew. We want to look at Matthew chapter 18, verses 19 to 20. Matthew 18, 19 to 20. So where are we? I'll read that for you. Matthew 18, 19 to 20. "Again, truly I tell you, if 2 of you agree on earth about anything you ask, it will be done. It will be done for you by my Father in heaven. For where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, I am there among them." Here ends the reading of the gospel. Matthew 18, 19 to 20. So for discussion and for your ponderings, what are some key truths that this passage contains about praying together in community? What are some of the key truths that this gospel contains as we in praying in community? Now, a lot that we've been talking about has been personal prayer. Now we're praying in community. So what are some of the key truths in this passage? Again, truly I tell you, if two of you agree on earth about anything you ask, it will be done for you by my Father in heaven. For where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, I am there among them. Well, first, I think it encourages group prayer for church discipline, right? So when you are in a church environment, and it encourages group prayer as a discipline for us to follow, which we do in our service, and most churches do. For me, I think one of the major key truths is that it assures the church of Christ's presence. And in that time, that's very important because it's more Christ-centered than Torah-centered. So I think that was huge and needs to be huge even for us today, that we're very Christ-centered, that when we gather, the divine presence is among us. And that's beautiful because we're assured of that. And to me, those are the key truths, the encouraging group prayer and assuring us of the divine presence, that it's Christ-centered and not Torah-centered. So I want you to think about some of the challenging circumstances in your life. I mean, we all have them. What would be a challenging circumstance in your life that you can think about? And as you're thinking about that, remember God's promise for this week. When a believing person prays, great things happen. You may be challenged with something at work, something in your home, a relationship. When a believing person prays, great things happen. Make that your mantra for this week as you go about your week and things get challenging. Meditate on that verse 3 times. Everything in 3s, right? 3 times. Say that verse 3 times to yourself when you're feeling challenged with something personal, professional, at home. If you have children at home and you're trying to do virtual learning, that's very, very difficult. Or if you live at home and you're by yourself, sometimes the challenge for you is just trying to get up to face another day when you're by yourself. Or maybe the challenge is just trying to do something that you have to do because you're by yourself, but it's hard to do something by yourself. Maybe that's a challenge. When a believing person prays, great things happen. So meditate on that this week. Perhaps write a prayer listing some of the great things that God might do. And I would offer for you to make a commitment to yourself this week that prayer does matter, and that you commit yourself to prayer every day, at least once a day. And prayer does not have to include, I don't know if y'all were taught this, but I know I was, adoration, confession, thanksgiving, supplication. It's a conversation with God, a faithful, honest conversation. And as I said in the beginning, to bring it right back around is God will listen. And your prayers do matter because you matter. You are a child of God, loved and forgiven, and you matter, and he will listen to every prayer that you bring forth. So let us now pray together, shall we? God of Elijah, with great fire you made your presence known to the worshipers of Baal. Help us to resist the temptation to place our trust and faith in anything other than you. Receive our worship and strengthen our faith. Amen. Have a great week. May God speak to you how God will.